The chandeliers inside the grand sapphire hall glistened like icicles suspended mid-melt, casting golden light over the sea of elegantly dressed guests. Every surface sparkled, from the mirrored walls to the silver-rimmed flutes filled with Veuve Clicquot. Waiters in black bow ties glided silently through the crowd, carrying trays of peppered crostini and jollof arancini. Outside, the lush gardens of the private Victoria Island estate shimmered under fairy lights and the faint hum of a distant saxophone. It was Pearlie Dew's 25th birthday, her golden year, and it was meant to be perfect. Pearl stood beneath a floral arch made entirely of white orchids and soft pink roses, her long emerald silk gown flowing like water around her. Her skin glowed, kissed by caramel undertones. Her tightly coiled hair swept into a regal updo, held in place by diamond pins. She was elegance wrapped in stillness, smiling, thanking guests, nodding graciously at every compliment. Beside her stood Derek Bassi, her fiancé of 2 years, a Lagos-born tech entrepreneur with the confidence of a man who believed the world was beneath his Gucci loafers. Derek was handsome in that curated way, tailored tux, freshly shaped beard, white teeth always ready for a camera flash. He leaned in and whispered something into Pearl's ear that made her laugh, though the laugh was brief, almost forced. Something in his posture had shifted tonight. She felt it like a vibration under her skin. But she pushed the thought aside. This was her night, her moment. She had built this moment. The Idu family, though old money adjacent, had never quite breached the elite class of Banana Island social royalty. But Pearl had, through hard work, through the curated perfection of her public image, through Derek. She was finally the woman her mother always wanted her to be, polished, engaged, admired. Just after the second course had been served, Derek tugged on her hand gently. "Pearl," he murmured, avoiding eye contact. "Can we step outside for a minute?" Pearl blinked. "Now? The speeches are starting soon." "Just a minute," he repeated, glancing toward the side garden. She hesitated, her champagne flute still half full. "You're not proposing again, are you?" she teased. He didn't smile, just exhaled hard and started walking. Pearl followed. They stepped out onto the marble terrace overlooking the lily pond. A soft breeze stirred the hanging lanterns, and the perfume of night-blooming jasmine clung to the air. Pearl turned to him, still clutching the hem of her gown. "What's wrong?" Derek ran a hand over his beard. "I didn't want to do this tonight, but I can't go through with the engagement." The words dropped like stones in her chest. "What?" she said slowly. "I'm sorry," he said. "I met someone else. It wasn't intentional. It just happened." The terrace suddenly felt miles wide. Her mouth was dry. You met someone else? Since when?" He hesitated. "It's been a few months." "A few?" Her voice cracked. "Who is it?" He didn't answer. "Who, Derek?" she demanded, louder now. He looked away. "Zena." Pearl froze. Her sister, Zena Idu. Her older, always adored, never satisfied sister. The one who said Derek was too serious and not your type. The same Zena who smiled at Pearl's engagement party while sipping champagne and whispering behind manicured fingers. "No, no, no," Pearl said, taking a step back. Her heart slammed against her ribs. "Tell me this isn't real." "I didn't mean to fall for her," he said, and then without shame added, "She's pregnant." Pearl felt like the night had split open. She turned without another word and stormed back into the hall, her heels pounding against the marble. The crowd inside was mid-toast, laughter, music. Her mother was smiling. And then Zena entered, late, glowing, draped in a velvet gown so black it seemed to drink the light around it. Her baby bump was unmissable. Her heels echoed as she walked straight into the spotlight, her expression smug and unapologetic. "Sorry I'm late," she said loudly, placing one hand on her stomach. "Derek and I had a little surprise to plan. We're expecting." A gasp cut through the room like a blade. Pearl stood frozen in the middle of it all, her birthday crown still resting on her perfectly coiled hair, mascara slowly smudging beneath her eyes. Zena's eyes met hers. She didn't blink, didn't apologize, just smiled like the whole thing was hers now. Pearl turned to her mother, waiting for support, for outrage. But Mrs. Idu simply adjusted her diamond choker and mouthed, "No scene." Pearl stepped back, then removed her heels one by one. She lifted her dress slightly, turned away from the room, and walked barefoot toward the exit. No one stopped her. Not her mother, not her sister, not Derek. Outside, the cold air wrapped around her like clarity. She walked past luxury cars and confused valets. Her phone buzzed with messages. She didn't answer. She got into her car barefoot and drove, away from the lights, away from the lies, past Lekki, past Aja, toward the sea. By dawn, Pearly Dew had disappeared. And she wouldn't return, not for 3 whole years. Pearl didn't remember most of the drive, just the wetness on her cheeks and the emptiness in her chest. When she reached the quiet coastal town of Ibashi, it was the silence that welcomed her. A silence so complete it felt holy. She found a small, worn-down bungalow not far from the water's edge, painted in faded turquoise with wooden shutters and a gate that creaked every time the breeze passed through. The caretaker asked no questions when she paid 6 months up front. She didn't tell him her name. Not her full one, anyway. In Ibeshi, Pearl became just Miss P, a name that rolled off the tongues of market women and the children who played on the beach at dusk. Oh, she traded heels for slippers, lace dresses for oversized cotton gowns, Instagram posts for handwritten journal entries, and slowly, painfully, Pearl Edu, the Lagos socialite with the billionaire fiancé, was buried beneath layers of stillness. She worked at a beach cafe run by a woman named Antina Neka, who took one look at Pearl's soft hands and asked, "You sure you can carry a tray, Cece?" Pearl smiled faintly. "I can try." The cafe served yam fries and grilled croaker, with ginger zobo and tall mason jars. Tourists came and went, but the locals stayed. No one asked where she came from. No one cared. And Pearl clung to that. Mornings were sacred. She'd walk along the shoreline with a cup of black coffee, her bare feet sinking into the cold sand. Sometimes she painted the waves. Sometimes she screamed into them. But mostly she just listened. To the water, to the wind, to herself. By the 3rd month, she had started painting again. At first on scrap cardboard with borrowed pencils. Later on canvas she bought from a small supply stall in town. Her hands remembered what her soul tried to forget, and the memories poured out. A girl standing in a room full of people who didn't see her. A crown cracked down the middle. A sister laughing in a mirror while the reflection cried. Pearl hung the paintings on the wall of her tiny home. Not for anyone to admire, just so she wouldn't forget. But life, even a quiet one, has a way of making room for new beginnings. It happened on a Tuesday. Pearl was sketching near the rocks, her straw hat pulled low, her sketch pad balanced on her knees, when a stranger's voice interrupted her rhythm. "Storm clouds?" he asked, pointing at her drawing. She looked up. He was tall, about 6'2", with rich dark skin, a well-defined jawline, and the kind of still eyes that made you feel studied. He wore dark jeans, a plain black tee, and leather sandals. There was no gold chain, no designer watch. Just a man who didn't seem to be in a rush for anything. "I like painting things that almost break," she said. He smiled faintly. "Interesting choice." "Do you paint?" "No, but I write." He pointed to the notepad in his hand. "Mostly poetry." Pearl nodded, uncertain. "I'm Pearl." He hesitated. "Jason," he said. That was it. No surnames, no titles. Just Jason. For weeks after that, he kept showing up. Sometimes he brought fresh plantain chips from a roadside stall. Other times, nothing but quiet conversation. They talked about the sea, about jazz music, about the way Lagos never lets you breathe unless you disappear from it. But never once did he ask about her past. Never once did he push. And that made her curious. One evening, after the cafe had closed and the waves whispered promises to the shore, Pearl sat with Jason on the broken concrete steps that led down to the water. "Why are you here?" she asked. He was silent for a long time. Then he said, "To remember who I am without power." She turned to him confused. He stared out at the horizon. When everyone wants a piece of you, you stop knowing what parts are really yours. She didn't press. She understood too well. That night, as they walked back through the empty streets, Jason reached for her hand. Not possessively, just gently. Like a man reminding a woman she was still real. And Pearl let him. 3 months passed, then 4. Jason never missed a morning walk. Never failed to ask her, "What did you dream about last night?" And always he listened. Then, one humid Saturday morning, everything changed. Pearl was sweeping the cafe floor when Auntie Nneka rushed in, her wrapper clutched at her waist. "Cece Pearl! TVO! Come see!" Pearl followed her to the small transistor television in the kitchen. There on the screen, in crisp black and white, was Jason. Except he wasn't Jason anymore. He was Jason Sakiri, the billionaire, the real estate mogul, the man behind Sakiri Holdings, the empire-building Lagos skyline. Pearl froze. She remembered every poetry quote, every quiet laugh, every moment he looked at her like she was art. It was all a lie. That night when she confronted him, her voice trembled. "You lied to me." Jason sat quietly on her porch. No security, no entourage. Just the same black tee, the same sandals. "I didn't lie, I just didn't say everything. You're a billionaire." "Yes." "And you said nothing?" "Because the minute I tell people who I am, I stop being Jason. I become the headline, the asset, the wallet. You were the first person who didn't want anything from me, not even an explanation." Pearl's eyes burned. "But I trusted you. And I never stopped earning that trust," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You said you painted storms. I've lived in one all my life, until I met you." There was a silence so long, even the crickets seemed to wait. Pearl whispered, "I need space." He stood slowly. "I'll wait, for as long as you need." And then, just like that, he walked away. The days after Jason left were unnaturally quiet. Pearl sat on the porch of her bungalow, the same wicker chair creaking under her weight. But everything else had shifted. The sea still murmured. The market women still called out in broken English and Yoruba. Children still laughed in the street. But inside her, something had turned cold. She didn't paint, didn't walk the beach, didn't reply to Auntie Nneka's gentle knocks. For 3 years, Pearlie Dew had rebuilt herself from silence. Now all it took was one truth to remind her how fragile peace could be. Jason Sakiri. She whispered the name to herself sometimes, as if tasting it would make it easier to swallow. He was everything she had run from: wealth, legacy, power. A world where love came with cameras and loyalty had to be tested against tabloids. She'd buried that version of life under sand and sea, and now it stood at her doorstep, asking to be trusted. She wasn't ready, but she couldn't stop thinking about him. About how he sat in silence while she ranted. About how he never once reminded her of who he was, until she saw it on TV. And even then, his eyes hadn't changed. Still calm, still human, still Jason. Not Sakiri the billionaire. Jason the poet. That night, she opened the sketch pad for the first time in days and drew. Not a storm, not a shipwreck, not her sister. This time she drew a pair of hands, one holding the other, not tightly, just gently enough to say, "I'll stay." 3 weeks passed. Then one morning, Auntie Nneka returned from the market with a look Pearl had never seen before. Part amusement, part shock. "CCP," she said, barely holding back a smirk. "You get visitor." Pearl wiped her hands and stepped outside, and froze. There, parked beside the palm trees, was a matte black Range Rover. Not flashy, just sharp, professional. And beside it, in a white linen shirt and dark slacks, stood Jason. He wasn't smiling. He looked like a man who hadn't slept. His beard was slightly rough, his eyes darker than usual. But he didn't move until she did. Pearl stepped off the porch, slowly. "What are you doing here?" "I promised I'd wait," he said, "but I never promised I wouldn't show up." Her breath caught. He walked closer, stopping at a respectful distance. "You told me once that storms were beautiful because they washed everything clean, but storms also leave things behind. Broken things, hidden things. I've had my share." She didn't respond. He pulled out a folded sheet of paper and handed it to her. A poem, written in his handwriting. "I found silence in your laughter, not the kind that hushes pain, but the kind that says, 'Come rest here. I will not let the world bruise you again.'" Pearl's fingers trembled as she read it. Jason stepped forward. "I'm not here to take you back to that world. I'm here to ask if I can stay in yours. If there's still a place for me here, at your table, on your beach, in your mornings." Pearl looked at him for a long time, at the quiet power in his stance, the honesty in his voice, the poetry he carried like armor. She exhaled. "I don't want mansions. I don't want drivers or red carpets. I want mornings where I don't have to guess who I am to someone. Can you give me that?" Jason nodded. "I want the same thing." The sea sighed behind them. She stepped forward, close enough to smell the salt on his skin, the faint trace of ode. "I'm still scared," she whispered. "So am I," he said, "but I'm more afraid of losing you." And then she leaned into him, forehead resting against his chest. He held her like someone who had learned the value of soft things. 3 months later, they married. Not at a hall in Victoria Island, not with lace asoebi and governors on the guest list. They married barefoot on the beach. Pearl wore a simple cream gown, her hair in long braids wrapped with gold thread. Jason wore white caftan trousers and a short tunic with embroidery at the collar. No ring bearer, no speeches. Just a coastal priest, 2 witnesses from the cafe, and the wind. Jason's vows were only 10 words long. "I see you, Pearl. I will always see you, always." Pearl's voice cracked when she whispered back, "And I will always believe the man you are beneath the name." After the kiss, the waves crashed louder. And for the first time in years, Pearl laughed so hard she cried. The invitation arrived in a thick white envelope, delivered by hand to the gates of the Ibesha villa. Pearl stared at it for a long time before touching it. No name on the front, just a gold-embossed seal. A private dinner. Zina Idu's 35th birthday. Venue, the Monarch Lounge, Ikoyai. Dress code, black tie. No phones, no press. Pearl turned it over twice in her palm before placing it on the counter beside a bowl of oranges. Jason said nothing. He just watched her. That night, they sat side by side on the back patio, the sound of the waves drifting through the salt-heavy air. Jason sipped tea. Pearl sat barefoot in his oversized shirt, her legs tucked under her. She finally spoke. "She wants to see if I survived." Jason didn't flinch. "Do you want to show her?" "I want to show myself." He nodded. "Then we go." The Monarch Lounge wasn't just upscale, it was exclusive, the kind of place politicians whispered deals and oil magnates celebrated birthdays behind velvet curtains. On the night of the dinner, Pearl stepped out of the car in a custom gown the color of midnight. It hugged her like it had been sewn onto her bones, high slit, deep neckline, and subtle gold threading across the hem. Her skin shimmered in the soft lighting, and her natural hair was pulled into a regal braided crown. Jason, in a black velvet tux with a soft gray pocket square, said only one thing when she stepped out of the dressing room. "You look like vengeance wearing grace." She smiled, kissed his cheek, and whispered, "Let's go remind them who I am." The room fell into hushed whispers the moment they walked in. Pearl entered first, her heels silent against the polished floors. Jason walked half a step behind, tall, composed, lethal in his silence. Eyes turned, forks paused midair. Someone gasped. Zina, seated at the head of the candlelit table, looked up and froze. Her wine glass trembled slightly in her hand. Pearl smiled as she approached. "Happy birthday, sister." Zena stood slowly. "Pearl," she said, her voice measured, "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I almost didn't," Pearl replied. "But then I remembered I never got my piece of cake last time." The table fell silent. Zena's guests, politicians' wives, influencers, old family friends, watched with sharp eyes and fuller glasses of champagne. No one dared to interrupt. Zena composed herself and motioned for a server to bring 2 extra seats. "Please, join us." Pearl and Jason sat near the end of the table, not at the head but not far from it. The placement was symbolic and intentional. Jason placed his hand gently over hers beneath the table. The dinner resumed, but not the conversation. Tension crackled like static. Pearl remained composed, every movement deliberate. She laughed softly when appropriate. She greeted people by name, thanked the server, and never once looked flustered. The woman who had once been discarded like a broken ornament had returned polished, poised, and untouchable. Zena barely touched her food, her smile strained with every stolen glance toward Pearl. Finally, someone spoke. An older woman in a head wrap, seated across from them, leaned in with a curious smile. "You look familiar, my dear. Who's your husband again?" Pearl didn't answer. Jason did. "Jason Sakiri," he said evenly, offering a small nod. The woman's eyes widened. The name sank into the table like thunder. Even Zena's breath hitched. Someone whispered, "The Jason Sakiri?" Pearl's eyes sparkled with something sharp. "I believe there's only one." The whisper started then, small, furious, uncontainable. Zena's hand tightened around her napkin. When dessert was served, Pearl stood. She raised her glass, not to toast but to speak. "I won't take long," she said, her voice soft but commanding. "I just wanted to thank the hostess for the invitation." All eyes turned to Zena. "I know it takes courage to invite people from the past," Pearl continued, "especially the ones you've buried." Zena said nothing. Pearl smiled. "I used to think I was broken, that something inside me must have been wrong, because betrayal doesn't happen by accident, not from the people you love." Silence. "But I realize now, you didn't betray me because I was weak. You did it because you thought I'd never rise." She turned slightly, meeting the eyes of every guest around the table. "I didn't come here to embarrass anyone, or reclaim something old. I came to remind myself that I survived. Not quietly, not bitterly, but beautifully." Her hands slipped into Jason's. "And I didn't need to destroy anyone to do it." She raised her glass one final time. "To rebirth." Jason stood and pulled her chair back. She thanked him softly. Together they walked out. Heads turned. Whispers surged. Zena sat still, silent beneath her lashes, the cake before her untouched. And as the door closed behind them, Pearl didn't feel vindicated. She felt free. The morning after Zena's birthday dinner, Pearl Sakiri's name was everywhere. Not in whispers, not in coded hashtags. Everywhere. Bloggers posted blurry photos from the Monarch Lounge. Pearl in that midnight gown, her hand delicately wrapped in Jason Sakiri's. A single photo of them stepping into the black SUV was enough to ignite the fire. Who is Mrs. Sakiri? Jason Sakiri's mysterious bride breaks internet. Zena Idu's long-lost sister makes dramatic return. By noon, it was trending across Nigerian Twitter. By evening, it had hit international gossip blogs. By night, news outlets were calling it the most elegant resurrection of the year. And Pearl? She turned off her phone and went to water her bougainvillea. Jason watched her from the doorway of their Banana Island home, a minimalist white villa draped in ivy and jasmine, floor-to-ceiling windows, silk curtains, and no noise. "Do you want me to call my PR team?" he asked gently, stepping into the sunlight. Pearl looked up from her watering can. "What would they do?" "Release a statement, clean up the narrative, control the headlines." She smiled faintly. "Let them say what they want. The truth doesn't need press." Jason walked over and kissed her forehead. "Then let them talk." But not everyone was content to let it lie. A week later, Zena posted a video. Glossy makeup, white blouse, somber tone. There are stories being twisted. I've made mistakes, yes, but the world doesn't know everything, and some people aren't who they pretend to be. Pearl didn't respond. She didn't post a rebuttal, didn't go on live TV, didn't explain herself. Instead, she poured all her rage and tenderness into her art. Her gallery, House of Rebirth, opened in Ikoyi 3 months later. Hidden behind a nondescript gate near Milverton Road, it was part studio, part sanctuary. No paparazzi, no red carpet, just clean walls, soft light, and paintings that whispered truths too raw to speak. On opening night, the main exhibit was a single piece, a faceless woman standing before a cracked mirror. In her hands, she held a crown made of glass. The plaque beneath read, "What they broke, I rebuilt in silence." P.I.S. Jason stood beside her all night saying nothing, just letting her light radiate. And when guests whispered, "She's the one from the Xena scandal," Pearl smiled and walked on. But scandal has long legs. One morning, her mother showed up. Mrs. Eleanor Edu in a beige linen caftan, pearls at her throat, and a face sculpted from pride Botox. The staff hesitated at the gate, but Pearl gave permission. Eleanor stood in the living room like it was a courtroom. She didn't sit. "You didn't have to shame your sister like that." Pearl looked up from her tea. "I didn't," she replied. "She did that all on her own." "She's hurting, Pearl." "So was I." Silence. Eleanor's jaw tensed. "You could have handled it privately." "I did. For 3 years. You were silent." "I was trying to protect our name." Pearl rose from her seat. "I'm no longer part of your name," she said. "I carry my husband's now. And even before that, I carried my own." Eleanor flinched. "Why are you really here?" Pearl asked, walking to the window. "I miss you," she said quietly. Pearl turned slowly. "No," she replied. "You miss controlling me." Eleanor took a breath, shaky for the first time. "Then tell me what to do. How do I fix this?" Pearl studied her mother's eyes. No tears, just tiredness. For a moment, she saw not the matriarch, but the woman. "You don't fix this," Pearl said gently. "You accept it." That night, she found Jason reading by the pool. She climbed onto the lounge chair beside him and placed her head on his chest. "I feel like I'm walking through flames," she murmured. "You are," he said, "but you're not burning." She was quiet for a moment. "Did I overdo it?" she asked. Jason turned the page of his book slowly. "No, you just stopped shrinking." She exhaled. And for the first time in years, Pearl Edu didn't second-guess herself. She had become the woman the world tried to destroy, and still rose with elegance in her stride and thunder in her truth. The Women of Power Summit was an annual event held at the iconic Echo Atlantic Towers, a gathering of CEOs, founders, social impact leaders, and the women who made Lagos spin without applause. Pearl had never attended it before. Not because she wasn't invited, but because Xena was always one of the keynote speakers. This year was different. Pearl sat at the long marble island in her open kitchen, a letter in her hands. "Dear Mrs. Pearl Sakiri, we would be honored to have you deliver this year's closing speech." She folded the paper neatly. Jason walked in from the study, sleeves rolled up, tie loose, holding a mug of hot cinnamon tea. He leaned against the counter, watching her carefully. "You're not smiling." Pearl stared at the invitation. "I'm stunned. You've earned this." "I used to dream of being in rooms like that," she whispered. "Now I don't know if I belong there, or if I'm walking into a trap." Jason took her hand. "Maybe it's not about the room anymore. Maybe you're the reason the room matters." 2 weeks later, she stepped out of a matte black Range Rover in front of the glass tower. Her outfit was as deliberate as her stride. A silk blush pink suit tailored to perfection, with gold accents along the lapel, her makeup soft, her natural hair in a halo braid. She wore no jewelry, no brooch, no diamonds. Just clarity. And a look that said, "I no longer need permission to exist." Inside, the main ballroom was buzzing. Rows of chairs lined beneath white chandeliers. A glossy stage with LED lights framed the words, "Reclaiming Power, Redefining Legacy." The hostesses nearly tripped when they saw her. One whispered, "That's Jason Sakiri's wife." The other added, "That's Pearl Edu, the one from, you know." Pearl smiled at them kindly. She wasn't ashamed of whispers anymore. She made her way to the VIP lounge, where women sipped rosé and adjusted mic packs. And there, standing near the makeup artist table, was Zena. Clad in crimson silk, her face professionally set, her smile frozen. Their eyes met. Pearl waited for the awkward glance away. It never came. Zena walked over. "Pearl," she said as if tasting the name. "Zena," Pearl replied, voice neutral. Zena looked her up and down. "You look different." "You don't," Pearl said softly. Silence. Zena sipped from her flute. "I hear you're closing." "I am. I hope it won't be personal." Pearl smiled. "Everything I am is personal." Zena's eyes flickered. "We were kids. I was reckless. You were cruel." Another silence. Zena looked around, lowering her voice. "You made me look bad." "No," Pearl said, voice steady. "You did that yourself. I just stopped hiding it." Zena's lips parted as if to protest, but then she didn't. Instead, she walked away. Hours later, the lights dimmed. Pearl walked up the stage stairs, heels silent. The hall held over 700 of Lagos's most powerful women. But no one moved. No one breathed. She reached the podium. Spoke with no notes, only memory. "I used to dream about being in rooms like this. Big names, bigger reputations. I thought that meant success." She scanned the crowd. "But it's not the room that defines you. It's what you carry when they try to close the door, when they betray you, when the ones you trust turn the keys and lock you out." Her voice held no anger, just gravity. "I walked away once, barefoot, humiliated, unseen, and I spent years learning how to walk again. Not to impress, not to prove, just to heal." Whispers, nods. "I built my life on silence. Now I speak because others haven't found the words yet." She paused. "My name is Pearl Sakiri, and I don't stand here because I was accepted. I stand here because I no longer care if I am." The room rose in applause. But Pearl didn't smile for them. She smiled for the girl who once stood barefoot in the parking lot of a stolen birthday, crying, shaking, and forgotten. She had returned, not for revenge, for closure. And she had become the woman they could never bury again. The fallout came fast. Days after Pearl's speech at the Women of Power Summit, the press spun into overdrive. Articles that once praised Zena Edu as a beacon of elegance and sisterhood began to sour. Headlines shifted from admiration to subtle questioning. Who is Zena Edu really? Old wounds, new whispers, the woman behind Lagos's most infamous betrayal. The sister she replaced speaks, and the city listens. Pearl didn't ask for the shift. She didn't need it. But it came anyway. One afternoon, as she walked through the halls of her Ikoyi gallery, checking the lighting in the West Wing, her assistant Toki approached cautiously. "Madam, you might want to see this." Pearl accepted the tablet. The video was shaky but clear. Derek Bassey, her ex-fiancé, slumped in a chair at some posh sixth lounge, clearly tipsy. A female influencer giggled behind the camera. "Zena," he slurred. "Zena was never the plan. That was her plan. Pearl was the real deal. That girl, she was gold." Someone off camera asked, "So why'd you leave her?" He laughed bitterly. "Man, I didn't leave Pearl. I lost her." Then, like he was confessing to a mirror, he added, "Biggest mistake I ever made." Toshi stood in silence. Pearl placed the tablet down gently. "Let it trend," she said. Tochi blinked. "You're not upset?" "I don't need his apology," Pearl said, "but the world does need the truth." By the end of the week, Zena's skincare brand, an overpriced line called Glass Glow by Zena, began to tank. Customers posted photos of rashes, delays in shipping, and customer service that ghosted. One comment under a popular review read, She couldn't protect her own sister's future. Why would I trust her with my skin? Zena tried to fight it, released a statement, did a polished IG lib with tears carefully timed. But it was too late. Lagos had shifted. And this time it was Pearl's name that sat sweetly in the mouths of society. But while the world was spinning, Pearl was planting. In the garden behind the gallery, she created a space just for women. A quiet courtyard with hand-carved benches, sage green walls, and a small fountain. No press, no husbands, no expectations. Just healing. She called it the mirror room. Mont Jason visited sometimes, always quiet, always with his journal in hand. He rarely spoke unless she asked, but when he did, he said things like, "Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just breathes." And Pearl would nod. She no longer needed validation. She had something better. Peace. One night, as they sat beneath the soft string lights of their garden in Banana Island, Jason handed her a small black box. Pearl opened it to find a ring. Not a diamond, but a silver band with her initials engraved on the inside. P.I.S. She looked up. "I already have a wedding ring," she whispered. "This one's for the woman who rebuilt herself," Jason said, voice low and poetic as always. "Not as a wife, not as a sister, not as a symbol, but as a self." Pearl blinked slowly, her heart rising in her chest. "Jason," he leaned in, "you are the most dangerous kind of beautiful, soft, self-made, and unafraid." She kissed him. Not because it was romantic, but because it was true. The Pearl Foundation for Girls was only 6 months old, but its impact echoed across Lagos. From Ilupeju to EPA, young women were attending workshops in self-worth, expression, and survival. What began as therapy for Pearl became purpose. So when the Hearts for Her charity gala extended an invitation to her as a featured honoree and co-speaker, she agreed. The venue was the Azure Dome in Victoria Island, a sleek crescent glass structure known for hosting royalty, tech billionaires, and presidential wives. Pearl wore a sleek, off-shoulder cream gown with a single slit and a gold wrist cuff. No earrings, her hair in a long, soft bun. Timeless, not trendy. Jason watched her step out of the SUV like she owned the moon. "Are you nervous?" he asked softly. Pearl smiled. "Only about the canapes." He grinned. Inside, a string quartet played softly beneath chandeliers, shaped like rain. A sea of glittering gowns, tuxedos, and embroidered agbadas filled the space. And then, the voice she knew too well. "Pearl." She turned. Zena, clad in a dramatic red gown, lips matte, eyes already rimmed with pretense. She looked older. Not from age, but from trying too hard to remain untouched by consequences. Pearl inclined her head. "Zena." "You're being honored tonight," Zena said, voice forced light. "So I've heard." "Congratulations." A tight smile. Pearl said nothing. Zena hesitated, then added, "I was asked to speak before you. I hope that's all right." Pearl blinked. "The stage belongs to whoever holds the mic. Just speak your truth." That landed like a slap. Zena's mask cracked for a second. Then she turned and walked away. As the night progressed, speeches were given, applause rippled, glasses clinked. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Zena Idu and Pearl Sakiri sharing the stage. Zena walked up first. The spotlight curved around her like judgment. She began slowly, carefully, talked about forgiveness, talked about mistakes, talked about the dangers of envy. People murmured. A few clapped. But something was missing. The polish was there, but the truth wasn't. Then she said it. "I once betrayed someone very close to me, and I've lived with the guilt of that night ever since." Pearl, standing off stage, tilted her head slightly. Zena swallowed. "We all deserve a second chance, even those who—" A clatter. Her voice cracked. I didn't mean to. I just didn't want to lose again." Someone in the front row looked at her sympathetically. But Zena wasn't talking to the audience anymore. She was talking to Pearl. Her eyes welled. "I didn't expect you to survive it. But you did. And two envied that too. Silence. Then unexpectedly, Zena began to cry. Not performative tears. Real ones. Heavy. Undeniable. The crowd stilled. She stepped away from the mic, hands trembling, her breath ragged. Pearl stepped forward, not to save her, but to take her place. She didn't address Zena. She addressed the room. I've learned that forgiveness is not always reconciliation. It's not brunch. It's not let's move on. Sometimes forgiveness is silence, distance, boundaries. She paused. I don't share this stage tonight to reopen a wound. I share it to prove that healing exists, that a girl can be shattered at the center of her world and still build a new one without apology. A hush fell. Pearl's voice grew softer. I am not here to embarrass anyone. I am not here to ask for applause. I am here to be seen, not as someone who survived betrayal, but as someone who chose not to become what hurt her. Applause exploded. The gala erupted, standing ovation, eyes moist. Zena stood off to the side, watching, face streaked with mascara, hands clutching the podium edge like a lifeline. And Pearl? She smiled. Not out of pity, not out of pride, but because the story had finally been told. By her. On her terms. It arrived on a Wednesday. A letter, not an email. Cream-colored, gold-stamped with an embossed crest from the Silver Journal. An internationally acclaimed publication known for spotlighting powerful women who had reshaped culture and reclaimed narrative. Inside it read, Dear Mrs. Pearl Sakiri, we are honored to invite you as our next global cover feature for the reclaimed issue. Your story is one of power, grace, and resilience. The world is watching. Let us help them understand what they see. She read it 3 times, then once more. Jason found her standing by the pool, barefoot, the letter pressed to her chest. They want to put me on the cover, she said. He didn't ask which magazine. He just walked up behind her, slid his arms around her waist, and kissed her shoulder. You deserve it. Pearl shook her head. It's not just a photo shoot. It's my life. Exposed again. Is that what it feels like? Jason asked. Exposure? Pearl thought for a moment. No, it feels like fire. Bright, but dangerous. He was quiet. Then, you were never the flame, Pearl. You were always the light. That night she couldn't sleep. She paced the house in her silk robe, bare feet skimming marble, moonlight spilling through the tall glass windows. Memories tugged at her. Her sister's smirk. Her mother's silence. Derek's confession. The whispers, the headlines, the pain. The world loved a comeback story, but it also loved to tear the hero down once they were high enough to fall. If she said yes, it wouldn't just be a spread. It would be interviews, podcasts, TV spots, the whole world knowing what she barely had the strength to survive. And yet, she was no longer surviving. She was living. She stared at the moon. I don't owe them my pain, she whispered. But maybe, she added after a pause, I owe the next girl my voice. In the morning, Pearl called her lawyer, then her PR rep, then her stylist. And by afternoon, her response had been sent. Yes, on one condition. I don't want to talk about Zena. I want to talk about women who rise without dragging others down. I want to talk about healing, not gossip. And I want my story told in full, not in fragments. The reply came swiftly. Agreed. We've never had someone say it quite like that. You just became the story. The shoot happened in Banana Island. Minimal makeup, soft silk blouse, one braid falling down her shoulder. No diamonds. Just her. The headline read, Pearl Sakiri, the woman who rebuilt the crown they tried to break. The interviews followed. Women cried listening to her TED Talk. Teen girls tagged her Art Foundation on Instagram. University panels studied her as a case on public image, grace under fire, and female leadership in West Africa. Even international shows, from London to Cape Town, called for appearances. But Pearl remained selective. She didn't want to be famous. She wanted to be useful. One evening, she returned from a panel on sisterhood without rivalry, exhausted but glowing. Jason was waiting with a glass of fresh Zobo, cut pineapple, and a handwritten note on her studio table. It read, "I fell in love with a woman who didn't just survive. I married the one who chose to rise. You were always the poem. The rest of us are just trying to find the words." She read it 3 times, folded it into her journal, and whispered, "I finally know who I am. Not a victim, not a headline, not a shadow of someone else's legacy." She was Pearl Sakiri, the woman the world once pitied, now the one they looked to for strength. The letter came in a pale gray envelope, hand-delivered, with a wax seal she recognized instantly, her mother's personal monogram. Eleanor, I do. Pearl sat in the sunroom, morning light spilling across the marble floor, the unopened letter resting on her lap. Outside, birds chirped in the lemon tree Jason had planted after their wedding. The world felt still, safe, untouched, but the envelope felt heavy. Jason entered quietly, his journal under one arm. He said nothing, only offered her a look. A look that said, "You don't have to open it unless you want to." Pearl inhaled and broke the seal. Inside was a single handwritten page. "My daughter, I have watched you rise, with grace, with fire, with a dignity I did not give you, but that you found on your own. I want to say sorry, not just for my silence, but for the legacy of pride I passed down to you and your sister. You didn't deserve what happened, and I was wrong to turn my face when you needed me to fight. I know you've closed the door, but this letter isn't to ask for a key. It's just to say, I see you now. I see who you've become, and I am proud. Eleanor." Pearl read it twice, then a third time. Then she folded it neatly and placed it in her drawer beside a necklace her father once gave her. A keepsake, not a comeback. Jason, still quiet, finally asked, "Do you want to respond?" Pearl stared out the window, the sunlight catching the edges of her braid. "No," she said softly. "I think I needed to hear it, but I don't need to reply." He nodded. "That's peace, Pearl, not silence. Peace." She turned to him, a smile tugging at her lips. "I'm learning." Later that week, she hosted a private art circle at the Mirror Room. Just 10 women, paint, canvas, and honesty. No filters, no titles, just stories. One of the women, a timid university student, asked quietly, "How did you forgive them?" "Your sister, your mother." Pearl set down her brush. "I didn't forgive to let them back in," she said. "I forgave so I could leave the door closed, without hatred." The women nodded, some teary-eyed. And in that moment, Pearl realized her story was no longer about survival. It was about teaching others how to breathe after betrayal. That night, she stood at the balcony of her Banana Island villa, arms wrapped around her midsection, watching moonlight ripple on the water. Jason stepped behind her, sliding his arms around her waist. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm full," she whispered. He rested his chin on her shoulder. "Of regret?" "No," she said, smiling. "Of life. Of knowing that everything they took from me only made room for something better." They stood like that for a long time. No flashbacks, no bitterness, just stillness and belonging. On her 30th birthday, she threw a dinner. Just a few close friends, her Mirror Room girls, and of course, Jason. No ball gowns, no floral arches, no public declarations. Just stories, laughter, freedom. And when someone asked, "What would you tell your 25-year-old self now?" Pearl raised her glass and answered, "They tried to bury you, but you weren't a secret. You were a seed." 3 years later, the Pearl Sakiri Foundation was no longer a quiet initiative. It was a movement. In the heart of Lekki, behind tall white walls and palm-lined gates, stood a place known simply as the Garden. It wasn't a school, not a gallery, not even a therapy center. It was all those things and more. Girls from every corner of Lagos walked through its doors. Some carried bruises you could see, others held wounds you couldn't. But each of them came to heal, to learn, to bloom. and every wall in the garden whispered the same truth. You are allowed to begin again. Pearl stood beneath a flowering jacaranda tree, barefoot in the soil, hands dusted with charcoal from a workshop she'd just finished teaching. Her once pristine gowns had been traded today for a white linen blouse and Ankara print pants. Her locks were longer now, curled down her back in soft waves. Her face, still beautiful, still strong, carried peace in every feature. She watched as a young girl, no older than 15, held a painting, a woman with broken wings, standing in front of a mirror. Pearl smiled. What's her name? The girl hesitated. She doesn't have one yet. Pearl nodded. That's okay. She'll find it, just like you will. The girl smiled shyly and ran off to join the others. Later that evening, Pearl sat at the edge of their private beach, her sketch pad resting on her lap, the ocean folding onto the sand in rhythmic waves. Jason joined her, barefoot in the surf, holding a cup of hibiscus tea. He sat beside her without a word, their silence now a language of its own. She leaned into him. I'm happy, she said. Jason's lips curved into a quiet smile. Not just happy. Whole. She turned her sketch pad so he could see. It was a new piece. A faceless woman, standing in a garden. Around her, vines, blooms, wildflowers, all growing from the soles of her feet, all untouched by fire. Jason looked at the drawing, then at her. She looks familiar, he said. Pearl smiled. She should. She's who I became when no one was watching. That night she sat by the window of their bedroom, watching the lights of Lagos shimmer in the distance. Jason slept peacefully, a book open on his chest. Pearl opened her journal and wrote one final line. They wrote me out. I rewrote myself, and this time, I kept the pen. Then she closed the journal, placed it on the shelf between two candles, and turned off the light. Outside, the garden slept. And inside, the woman they once betrayed was now a legend in peace. Dear viewers, what lesson did you take away from this dramatic tale? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.